Finding We, an exploration of attachment through the prism of ethical culture. Ethical culture doesn't have explicit tenets or 15 commandments like the movie History of the World Part 1, but it does ask if it asks of its members and followers to commit to building ethical relationships because we as a community feel they are imperative to social justice and realizing a better world. Christian is an American Ethical Union leader in training. He's on a year-long internship at the Ethical Society St. Louis. He spent a year in Ghana with the Humanist Service Corps and was awarded the Mosler Fellowship in 2016. Christian is a novice yet an avid photographer, a full-time facilitator, a very part-time poet, and is striving to be a 24/7 humanist. Please welcome Christian Hayden.
Good morning. I'm really hoping my internet holds up because my Ethernet cord is not in, but I think we're gonna do well. It feels like things are going well today. So to begin this platform, I want to take us back to a moment in 2017 when I remember this particular sinking feeling. A woman I had spent a decent part of 6 years pursuing, liking, whatever word you want to use. And excuse me if that word is jarring. It's a little old school or patriarchal, but I only felt that it was accurate to describe the sort of our dynamic. But at that time in 2017, I was coming to terms with the fact that this person who I had sort of fantasized and sort of put on the pedestal was leaving me. And after a 3-month long process of kind of severing our ties, I remember feeling the room was spinning around me, so desperately wanting to escape the pulling at the core of my being. I forced myself to go to sleep because I did not want to think anymore. And I was scared where my thoughts would lead. I woke up the next morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, did 100 push-ups, studied French, and decided I never want to feel like that again. I wish I could still do that, but not out of the circumstances. But the journey to that place and out of it was and is a long and never actually ending one. I had to confront how I got there as a prisoner to my dreams, a failure at my spiritual charge, confronting the fact that I lost sight or never had sight of what it meant to love. This story, though, really starts in my youth. I saw my mother, the unquestionable head of my household, provide and determinately establish home ownership in a part of Brooklyn that met her criteria for a place to raise her children. I also saw that my father, aloof if present, was in my household. But their relationship, its friction, its lack of attunement shaped what I thought about love from a young age. My mother's frustration with my father, or the way I was able to understand it, was due to the fact that he didn't provide enough support to the project she had set out on, to raise a Black boy, a Black family, to be successful in a white world. The bitterness this elicited from her stuck with me. And I remember feeling very young feeling that they were better apart than together. Many children fear their parents' divorce, and I welcomed it. The message to me that I had taken was clear, that love was support. Had my father offered more support, my parents' marriage would have worked and I would have been saved from witnessing their intense screaming matches. But now I realized there was another lesson I learned. Don't let someone get too close to you, because they can derail you, make you unpleasant, threaten the very thing you want to become. So I left behind a lot of things. I left behind my hometown, I left the religion of my youth, but this idea of love stayed with me. Why is this important? Because it took until that moment in 2017 to realize how I participate in every relationship as an adult was shaped by my experience of my parents' relationship. I kept people at bay. I'm stubborn with my sense of self. I need to protect my purpose. I need my joy to give. I need to serve. I need to write. I need to create. And no one will stop that. Yes, this platform is about love, or rather intimacy. What I had not realized that my conception of love was fraught. I had thought of love as a state of being. I was in love. One falls in love. We fall in love. But the concept of love as a verb escaped me. More specifically, the centrality of intimacy to love escaped me. After years of intense infatuations with people I expected to be my saving grace, the ones who would deliver me into acceptance, I had finally faced the fact that I was wrong, that something had to give. So I went to therapy, and my therapist suggested a book called Attached. The book uses attachment theory to explain how people function in relationships and how to understand one's own capacity for intimacy. Attachment styles are a way of describing the response one has to the process of building intimacy. And intimacy is defined as closeness, but it's much more than that. It's allowing each to be shaped by one another, to be known by one another, inspired and pushed to growth by one another. Who's taking chemistry? It's like a bond, a molecule, takes form and takes energy to break apart. What is formed has a different quality and function than what they were when they were apart. It is theorized that the parent-child relationship from infancy, as well as experiences of dating or enough of trauma, shape the way people form intimacy or the response to attaching. Some have a secure response. They can experience connection and intimacy without disorientation. They can communicate effectively. And then they can disconnect when needed, again, without disorientation. Others have an insecure response. Intimacy is disorienting. Some move away from intimacy, preferring independence, like me. Others, for intimacy, it induces an anxious response that makes one fear a person may leave them, so they seek them out constantly in ways that actually end up making intimacy more difficult. And some have a mix of those insecure attachment styles. They call it fearful avoidant, where connection can be reminiscent of chaos and disorder. So they end up replicating relationships, the chaos in relationships, pushing and pulling people back and forth. These styles can change during life, and with effort, it is possible to become more secure in your attachment. These classifications are not meant to be a measuring stick of one's worth or capabilities, only to offer framing and vocabulary to think about how effectively one communicates and deals with conflict and handles disappointment. This language is important because it validated for me and for anyone trying to build intimacy that it's a difficult thing. The possibility that two people might agree somewhat on what they're feeling or experiencing, working towards sounds simple, but it's not. It's not always a story about connecting I received. When I was young, I thought love was something I would find, like walking down the block. I would find it, sitting there, ready to be collected and shown off, married and impregnated, maybe. And then you found it. Or I would travel to some far off place, say Ghana, and I would find it there. But you repeat the list of things. But what was missing from my equation? It was a person, a relationship, any notion of something that is shared and cooperatively managed, co-created. It is not only my fault. I love music, and a lot of music expresses this idea of love, that it's something that happens to you. Or other phrases like falling in love fail to describe what being in love really means. For me, I had to say to myself, I didn't know that real love or intimacy will require us to be aware and sensitive to our history, to our needs, and the bravery in terms of the willingness to be vulnerable and to be ready and humble and intentional in creating space for others to come to terms with theirs too, in that space. This involves deep parts of us, internal and external, expectations about the future, cultural signifiers about whether we're accomplished. And though we operate in similar contexts for some of us, how we relate to these ideas could be very different. Reconciling between two people is a never-ending process, which can be fun, frustrating, or dangerous. Yes, trying to develop intimacy can be dangerous, especially if there's not equal power there. Because one's power in a relationship, their ability to make choices, to say what you need, to have your own independence, to try to realize who you are, is important. Sharing power can be difficult. As you can see, it requires communication, respect, trust, and equality. One person making decisions is not equal. Someone insulting their partner is not respect. Following a person around or watching their social media or being very jealous or possessive are not ways to form trust. And this may seem obvious, but this is what I'm getting at. So we're trying to build a bond with another person, our walls come down. And they could take advantage of that. A person could take advantage of that. And that leaves us more vulnerable. We share our lives with the person and they will know how to make us happy, or they can know how to tear us down. Sometimes folks take care with that privilege. Sometimes a person can be both our hero, as in someone who could make us happy, and our enemy, someone who hurts us. They might try to harm their partner through their body or their emotions or social media, money, or sex. A year and a half ago, I worked with a student, and 1 year later, that student reached out to us and said she wanted to interview me and my coworker. We thought nothing of it because we like to support our students and like maintaining relationships. So we said, yeah, we want you to graduate. But as my coworker and I began the interview, we learned that this woman was in an abusive relationship while she was in our class. Abuse is when one partner takes power or control over the other partner and makes it difficult to leave. And I asked her, what was the moment that clicked for her, that for her told her she was in an abusive situation? And she said, when she learned about the types of abuse in our class and she read about physical abuse, she realized that she didn't deserve to be hit. And when asked, what would she want other people to know? She said that it's going to be really hard getting away. She in her interview recounted how she didn't know where she found the strength not to call her partner, to finally leave. She's lucky. Many people, many Black women, do not make it out of abusive relationships. So what does attachment and intimacy have to do with ethical culture? I mentioned at the beginning of this platform that I failed at my spiritual charge. I see that as fostering ethical relationships. Felix Adler founded ethical culture based partly on the idea that relationships can be transcendent spaces, that we can be transformed by the people we engage with, bring out the best in others so that they could then bring out the best in them, so we could then bring out the best in ourselves. Felix Adler spent his life rejecting other theories of ethics, partially because they skewed the importance either of the individual or the collective. The sort of median then was the relationships that we form with others, protecting both our need for individuality and also our need to connect. So that's why the sort of household is central to his philosophy, his ethical philosophy. While he's sometimes very rigid and Victorian in his opinions of family life, he was unwavering in his faith that the heart of a stable society is a home that upheld and modeled his idea of the spiritual ideal. Every person should just thus be a spiritual artist, a portrait painter. The portraits painted having this virtue in them that they are not only like the spiritual original, but the original beholding them and is stared to a great love for his spiritual sublime counterpart and is moved in some measure to comfort to it. So we imagine that others can be their best. We treat them as if they can reach their best. They then feel like they can reach it. They're inspired or pushed. In relationships, right? So Lois Kellerman also a sort of a former ethical culture leader who wrote a book with another person called Marriage from the Heart. She spends a lot of time speaking about the work of cultivating relationship as a space, a sanctuary, where there's different pieces of each person intentionally, mindfully choosing to see and respect the partner, offering, seeking healing from a person, balance it, commitment to that person, but also with a disposition that is open to who they may inevitably change into. So this is difficult, and this is why I feel like it reaches the depth of a spiritual charge. And Felix Adler is co-signed by many, including James Baldwin. James Baldwin frames a comparison between the artist's relationship to society as a love relates to a lover. Societies never know it, he wrote or said, but the war of an artist with his society is a lover's war. And he does at his best what lovers do, which is to reveal the beloved to himself, and with that revelation to make freedom real. Simone de Beauvoir, right, sort of talks about freedom as sort of an ethical, like what makes existentialism so possible as an ethical philosophy for her is that when one is concerned about their freedom, they also become concerned about other people's freedom. Passion is converted to genuine freedom only if one distances existence to other existences through the being, whether thing or man, at which he aims without hoping to entrap it in the destiny of the in and of itself. So not sort of constraining and confining folks, but really tying our search for freedom to theirs. And what this reminds me of a Thich Nhat Hanh quote: love in such a way that the person you love feels free. Brene Brown, another favorite of mine, I think would love Felix Adler. But she says in her book, Dare to Lead, that vulnerability is the cradle of the emotions and experiences that we crave. Vulnerability is the birthplace of love, joy, and belonging. Her reframing courage as the ability to be vulnerable, to feel, is also the foundation which changes leadership and healthy relationships grow from. So building trust is a constant effort, like collecting marbles in a jar. Creating space in a relationship, business, or community for intimacy and vulnerability, what she calls is like creating a safe container. So when I said I'm a part-time poet, this is what I mean. So I wrote this thing sort of inspired by Brene Brown and said, am I a safe container for you? Wrong question. Have I cared for my soul enough in order to have the feet, the will, the still to build one for us? And through her language, I found that I had armored myself against vulnerability, against feeling hard things, and thus cut myself off from the highs of those feelings too. That to grow into love, I had to be able to offer belonging. But I had to offer belonging first to myself, right? And does that kind of sound familiar, like inherent worth, right? So I, like others, have to hold in tandem the possibility of this orientation of relationships and the possibility of transformation within relationships. I now realize is that how I love is how I love. It comes with its advantages, its disadvantages, but I'm still worthy of love and connection. Because being able to love does not stop me from accomplishing what I seek. It can deepen it and make it realer. So that losing I is not losing myself, it is fortifying myself, so that I can be strong, brave, and malleable enough to share deep space with another person. So there are sort of four main ideas or parts about this sort of frame, the foundation of a secure attachment. The first one is self-care. So being able to know what your needs are and what your boundaries are, right? We get that from sort of offering that love to ourselves. So then we might be able to communicate that to another person. Then there's attunement, where both people are aware of another sort of emotional states. And that doesn't make one responsible for the emotions another person feels, but it could make them more responsive in an appropriate way. Reliability. So being able for a person to have an understanding of what one can expect from it, right? And this is sort of where I feel like honesty is a big part, right? sometimes we might offer more than we can actually give in the beginning to try to sort of hold that person there, right? But the reliability is like, what can I expect from this person? What can they expect from me, right? And that kind of leaves the door open for comfort, right? When you have a sense of who this person is, what they want, what they need, right? You sort of, the anxiety that maybe relationships can produce is sort of disseminated. You're capable of being yourself, of saying, being who you actually are. So I think there are some really for those ideas. I think there's some principles that are important to, encourage one to be able to build secure attachment. So one of those is accepting subtle invitations to build trust, right? There's a name for that. So what is it? Emotional. You sort of make a sort of slight appeal, right? And they can be really subtle. And if you're someone like me who's really distracted, you'll miss them, right? And so you have to kind of be attuned, right, to what someone's maybe asking for, maybe what they need, right? And it's a slow process. It takes time. And exchange the definition of arc meanings. Sometimes we may assume that this person thinks about, commitment as us, or even what infidelity is. My question that I like to ask now is, what does love look like to me? I like to sort of offer that answer and then ask someone, what does love look like to you? And then at some point get to the point of being able to ask, what does love look like to us? And then engage in the dance of attunement. So kind of like these sort of, accepting invitations, right? One being a sort of figuring out and looking at it as kind of a game, but also being aware of one's spatial awareness. How does when I'm here affect this person in a different way, or when I'm there, when I do this, right? And when and someone maybe being aware that they're also part of that dance. And then cultivate joy and experiment and play, right? Which is directly tied to that, right? And this may seem hard these days because we're in a very stressful time. But I found that the outward attempting to find joy, create joy, fills me with joy. It kind of allows me to forget of the things that trouble me. So I feel like this applies to more than romantic relationship, because I think it works. But in romantic relationships, we're able to very intensely, so very immediately meet these things, but sort of taking them out to, how we move into the world, I think is an important part of realizing ethical culture's spiritual charge. Treating each moment in relationship with people as a space for possible reconciliation, discovery, and transformation. So what I'll do is I want to end here with a poem. I realized in April of this year that I had learned the wrong lesson from my father. In April, my father lost his wife, my stepmother, to lung cancer. And it took to that moment when I realized that he, after my mother and him divorced, is that he found a love that he was able to experience transformation. So here it is. Harlem lost a love. 145th used to buzz. From the terrace, you could see the spot where this all begun. It was 2008, and the prettiest young girl was tugging at my arm. I was just talking, I wasn't doing no harm. And you said to me so gently, shape that ass up, act right, and direct your attention towards her. It was the first time in my life someone told me to act like my daddy. And now I write through tears, trying to hold on to memories, lessons I couldn't quite learn yet. Grateful and heavy for love. Yes, enough to mourn it.
Thank you very much, Christian. Does anybody have any questions, comments for Christian? I saw an entry on chat here for you really struck a chord.